Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Piz. The Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 27th of August 2024. Two things to note before I start proper. One, I have changed my boom mic. 50% of people saying, I love you using your headset, the sound is so much better, and 50% saying the sound is so much worse. Don't use it. And it's amazing that the same people can listen to the same audio output and have completely different opinions. Now, you are going to have your own audio setups at home or wherever you're listening, and some things will work better for some people on some systems with certain speakers or headphones or whatever. So there will be variation, but I just need to speak closer to my boom mic. Anyway, it is what it is. You can all have a big argument. I'll probably do a poll at some point. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, I sometimes get comments like this, and I don't want to pull out my disability badge all the time, right? But I am just going to explain, because there will be a lot of people who don't realise. I know I've repeated this a million times, but I get 50% of my viewers are new viewers, unique viewers every day. So a considered opinion says, it's a pity Jonathan is such a poor presenter. His stumbling and stuttering detracts from what could be a very informative presentation. I do apologise that I stumble and stutter. It is literally one of the main symptoms of my primary progressive multiple sclerosis. So I do have PPMS and cognitive load, which means the ability to multitask and hold different things in my head at the same time. My ability to find words and to construct sentences in syntactically coherent manner is really badly affected. My speech, compared to what it was 10 years ago, is very, very badly affected. And one of the things I will do is stutter and stammer, because I'm trying to find the next words and the next sentence. But also remember that all of my videos, all of them are stream of consciousness. I put a bunch of stimuli up there and just rely on I have faith that my brain will somehow make some coherent sense over what I have posted above in the tabs. So this isn't scripted, and there will be a lot of me, I guess, filling so that my brain can just queue up the next thing to say. I'm terribly sorry if you find my stumbling and stuttering is not good enough for you, but there's an explanation to some degree. Yes, it is pulling out my blue disability badge. So be it. That's just what is going on in my head and body. Right, we're going to start. No, we're not. We're going to continue by going to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description to the video below. 1,280 personnel lost is a high number. We have seen it around the 1,190-ish mark for a couple of days. It's now popped up by another sort of 100. That is a significant, anything over 1,000 is an incredibly significant number. And yes, 1,000 is an arbitrary number, no different from any other number. But the way I see it is that, we were used to 600, well, goodness me, the beginning of the war, 300 is like, oh my goodness, 300 people are perishing today, 600 people, oh my goodness, 700, 800. Does this mean injured as well? And then there was clarification that it included wounded, and almost certainly includes deserted and captured as well. So we've now seen a single day where it's 1,780 or 740. That was an anomaly. It was a huge day of losses for the Russians, and now anything but that approaches 1,300, I think, is a very bad day for the Russians, and therefore I think this is a very bad day for the Russians. 12 tanks is now up above the daily average. We've seen a number of days of 4 tanks, 5 tanks, so on and so forth. 12 is a bad day. 19 troop-carrying AFVs is above the daily average, but not as significant as we have seen, but that is still a very bad day for the Russians. 52 artillery systems, likewise. In that case, that's about 3 times the daily average. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 58 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 3 pieces of special equipment. A special note to the drones and cruise missile categories. 120 drones and 103 cruise missiles is a phenomenally high number. And indeed, it was higher than that. There's a cut-off in the middle of the night usually for these figures, and so it depends when that was kind of listed and when the previous night ended and started. And so that will be taking into account probably some missiles from last night and some missiles from the night before. So it doesn't track exactly to how we would understand what the missile and drone usage was on any given night. Now, Andrew Perpetua has not yet done his update for the day, so there's no Perpetua figures yet for visually confirmed losses. As he says here, there are 110 vehicles. I haven't checked for ID yet for yesterday, so that's not going to be finalized anytime soon. Effing 227 videos yesterday. I did 87 myself and checked another 20 to 30, which means I still have over 100 videos left to check. I mean, goodness me, that man is one of the hardest working humans concerning this war. Right, the 295 MS disappeared from radar from the Engels airfield yesterday. The plane was flying to Kharkiv. Crimean partisans, with reference to the armed forces of Ukraine, have claimed. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean a plane has come down or anything like that. Planes do sometimes disappear from radar. This is potentially a loss of a big strategic bomber, or it's some kind of weird anomaly. Take it for what it is. And we have some footage here of a destroyed Ukrainian M577 command post carrier and a burnt out MRAP somewhere in the Kursk region. Ukraine received 60 of these M577 command post carriers, of which none have been lost until now. So that's why I've included this one. It's just a slightly different loss. A command post carrier, so quite an important vehicle, might have contained some a commander in there or an officer with some intel, and that personnel might have been lost, or just a destroyed vehicle that was abandoned and then left to be hit by FPV drones or something like that without the loss of personnel. You don't know, but anyway, that's one of those being lost. Now, some footage has come out of a significant strike to the east in occupied territory. I don't know exactly where. It could be somewhere like Luhansk. 2 Gimler's missiles smash into a Russian training base, and you can see all the people scatter, or not all the people. You don't know how many are lost in a strike like this, but there are a lot of people running in different directions. It's the sort of thing that cluster munitions would have been better for, but you hit with what you can. Certainly would have been some serious losses there for the Russians, as those 2 missiles strike and would have caused all sorts of shrapnel to fly out. So even when you see tiny specks, ants almost, sort of running, there could still be some serious damage done to those, injuries done to those people. But yeah, so that's caught camera. Now, this is an incredible bit of footage. Video of members of the Ukrainian 425th Scala Assault Battalion fighting in Toretsk. I mentioned this in my mapping update this morning, but didn't have the video for my mapping update. Just look at the apocalyptic background there. Look at that landscape, the burning houses all over Toretsk as an M113 and a Bradley race through. Just incredibly depressing that Russians' idea of liberation is to smack the crap out of any settlement they come across. And quite a distinct difference for what the Ukrainians are doing in Kursk, it has to be said. But anyway, there's some footage there that you might want to look at. That should be linked in the description to the video below. I just thought I'd show you the landscape there. Twitter doesn't allow, says Andrew Perpetua, doesn't allow me to share what I actually think about this video. They chase down a civilian and kill him. So Andrew Perpetua has righteous indignation quite often about this, and for good reason. So he sees, as I've already mentioned with what he said there, an awful lot of videos on a daily basis. He sees videos that show everything. And he gets really annoyed very often because there are so many videos of Russians chasing down civilians with FPV drones. And this is just a war crime. This is not a tactically, militarily important strike. This is civilians living in Kherson or some town on the right bank of the river in Kherson Oblast, and they are just either training or just outright malevolent. They are taking out the civilian vehicles or just civilians walking, chasing them sometimes. So they chase down a civilian and kill him. You should watch it, especially if watching an old man die would bother you, because you should see what the Russians are doing. And the video is there. I mean, I won't play it. The video takes place in Kindivka, And Kandivka and Antonivka have had over 50 civilians wounded, and at least 4 have died, maybe 5 here, over the past 3 weeks. As you can see, the river going past there. By the way, this video was kept by this Russian unit as a celebratory video for reaching 4,000 subscribers. They decided to release it early. They have 3,300. They celebrate this. That is what the Russians are doing. If you're still on my threads arguing some kind of NATO expansionism or some kind of, oh, it's all the US's fault and Russia are not to blame and it's all the Ukro-Nazis being blah, 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 blah. Just actually watch the stuff that Russia do on a consistent basis. Have a chat with Andrew Perpetua. See what he thinks about the moral rectitude of the Russian armed forces. They're a disgrace. Now, some possibly sabotage in Russia here. Something's burning at the Institute of the National Guard of Russia in St. Petersburg. So a fire there in the heart of kind of elite Russian urban environment, St. Petersburg. You have a military target burning. So I suggest some kind of sabotage. Right, moving on to distant strikes. Now, if you remember yesterday, obviously we remember there was a massive strike yesterday. But I said the important thing is to note what happened the next night. If I was Russia and had everything I could possibly get hold of, if I had a military industrial complex that was manufacturing enough ordnance at rates that meant Russia was able to properly take out Ukrainian infrastructure, then you would see on consecutive nights the same sort of activity. And I said, if you see another, so what was it, 109 drones yesterday, or 2 nights ago, and 120 something missiles, something like that, 236 pieces of ordnance. If you see a similar thing the next night, then that means the Russians really are producing things at the rate that they would need. Now, interestingly, they did attack a consecutive night, a second night in a row. So civilians were killed and injured as Russia launches a large-scale attack for the second night in a row. Russia launched a combined wave of attacks against Ukraine for the second night in a row, reportedly using 81 Shahed-type drones. First of all, it's worth noting that there were fewer Shahed sent on the second night. So that tells you something. And also, though, that 81 drones is a lot of drones. Now, I personally think they probably just thrown all the drones they had stockpiled. So there've been some stockpiling. I showed you the figures yesterday. You've had a couple of months of very low rates of particularly cruise missiles being sent into Ukraine. So they were stockpiling for this. Now, this second night of consecutive attacks, instead of 120 odd missiles, they sent 10 missiles. That's your important statistic there. Russia are unable to do those kind of attacks on a consistent basis. They have to stockpile for a long time, and then we were expecting this. I've said for about a month now. I was saying before I went on holiday, expect a massive attack of Russian missiles. The fact that it's taken this long to stockpile, and then on a second night, all they can muster with 10 missiles instead of 120 whatever missiles, tells you that the Russians are unable to make enough missiles. They're obviously doing slightly better on drones there, but the drones have a much better interception rate, so they're not as effective. What we are seeing here, I mean, this was last night's infographic. 5 out of 10 missiles were shot down. 50% interception rate on the missiles, which is not great, but that's predominantly because they are using more ballistic missiles. The night before, there was an awful lot of cruise missiles, and a large number of those were shot down. 60 out of 81 drones were shot down, so it's a pretty good interception rate. But actually, 21 drones getting through. Now, remember, they don't all hit their target. Some of them disappear. Some of them fall short or are affected by electronic warfare. So take that into account. Among the 5 missiles not intercepted were 3 Kinzhals, so they're their aeroballistic, supposedly hypersonic missiles that the Russians said are invincible. That they haven't been that during the war, because actually they have been shot out of the air, although not last night. So, as War Translated here says, 0 out of the 3 Kinjals, 0 out of the 1 Iskander-M, and 0 out of the 1 Iskander-K missiles were taken down. All 5 of the KH-101 cruise missiles were taken out, and 60 out of 81 Shaheeds. So another big night, but not nearly as big as the night before. Tim White says the Kinjal missiles may have done the most damage structurally. One was tracked heading to the military airbase at Khmelnytsky. Power station at Chernovyl also looks to have been targeted for the second night in a row, just 10 kilometers from Poland's border. Remember, the night before there were some ordnance flying around in Poland, and they decided not to take it out. It actually disappeared. They were considering whether they were going to or not, and then the decision was taken away from them. Last night, during air raids in Khmelnytsky region, Ukrainian air defense forces shot down 8 Russian targets. Emergency services are working to locate the debris. However, the attack caused fires in 2 private homes, and 1 resident suffered a concussion. By morning, power was fully restored in areas affected by the previous day's massive attack. But due to the strained energy system, scheduled power outages are in effect. Right. I spoke to Greg yesterday. I might have a live with him today, depending on timing for both of us. But yesterday's attacks, I said and it's true that the Ukrainian air defenses did an amazing job to take out as much stuff from the air as they did. Incredible interception rates given the overwhelming attack that took place. But that overwhelming attack still did get missiles and drones through. And the destruction to the energy system and the water system and critical infrastructure across Ukraine was severe, right? Yes, on the one hand, congratulate the Ukrainians for really good air defense work. On the other hand, the Russians have caused a lot of damage last night, and there's a lot of operational security around this, the sort of damage that it gets done by the Russians. And so we don't always hear about it and aren't always cognizant of it. But there was a lot of damage done 2 nights ago. And that will require the Ukrainians to pick up the pieces over a sustained period. The Americans are rushing in some, they're surging is the word that's been used, equipment to help the Ukrainians rebuild infrastructure that was damaged 2 nights ago. And then, of course, the damage from last night. I'm not wholly sure what was done last night. Just the big point is more damage was done than you might have thought. It is bad in Ukraine with these strikes. The good news is that I don't think Russia are able to do these kind of wide-ranging strikes as often as they would like. A Russian Iskander-M ballistic missile was launched yesterday from Crimea, and it hit Kryvyi Rih. What's important about this is we heard at Kramatorsk, the Reuters safety advisor died, Ryan Evans, and 2 other Reuters journalists were injured, pulled out rubble, as the hotel was struck in Kramatorsk by a similar missile. That was overt targeting and striking of journalists. And here we have another hotel, and I think it's a similar journalist hotel, or a hotel that's frequented by journalists. According to Russian sources, preliminary reports indicate the Aurora hotel complex was the target. Fire services are currently arriving at the location. The impact, that was last night, so that's done and dusted now. But, well, not done and dusted. There'll still be destruction they'll be picking through. Oliver Carroll, who writes for The Economist. Anyway, he said Russia attacks... in fact, I should probably go and find out here. Foreign correspondent for The Economist. Yeah. Okay. So Russia attacks yet another hotel with a ballistic missile, this time at the Aurora in Kryvyi Rih. Have stayed a couple of times there myself. 2 confirmed dead already. Horrific. This is yet another war crime. So it's really frustrating when you've had 2 hotels targeted, it appears purposefully targeted by the Russians in what I think is a war crime. And the international community, or like the US, are still holding Ukraine back from being able to use missiles to strike not hotels hundreds of kilometers back from the front line, but air bases and launchers that send these frickin' missiles into Ukraine. Ukraine is still not allowed to strike what they need to strike, not what they want to strike, what they need to strike to prevail in this war. And there are some people saying, Jake Sullivan is the second most unpopular person in the world for Ukrainians after Putin. it's really frustrating. Now, apparently there are conversations ongoing, and we'll return to this in the other section. But my goodness, those conversations should have been resolved months ago. Anyway, to remind you of the attack from last night, the 236 pieces of ordnance that were thrown into Ukraine, and then the 200 odd of those that were shot down, intercepted, and then what was left would have hit. There would have been some falling out of the sky in electronic warfare and so on and so forth. Anyway, that combined attack, according to no reports here, cost an estimated $1.2 to $1.3 billion, and it marks a record high for the entire period of the full-scale war. It is a little bit difficult. Right at the beginning of the war, they weren't counting the cruise missiles sent into Ukraine. So there might have been days when more stuff was sent into Ukraine, certainly with missiles, not with Shahed drones, because they didn't have them at that stage. But at the beginning of the war, there might have been nights where more missiles were sent. But from when it's been properly accounted, this is the biggest, the most costly strike for the Russians. And you could argue for the Ukrainians. In total, Russia used 236 aerial assets, including 127 missiles, 109 attack drones. And then the videos are now coming out. This is a really big explosion taking place at the Kiev hydroelectric power plant. So striking that critical infrastructure. This is significant. The Kiev hydroelectric power plants and the dams there, if they are taken out, then that causes dams all the way down Dnipro. That causes, I mean, you think the Novokakhovka was bad. This would be infinitely worse. Just they're dicing with some real issues there. And with Russia, the worse they do, the more likely it is that, say, the US will lift restrictions and help Ukraine even more. So the Russians have to be careful with what they do to Ukraine. If they do too much that's too successful, it ends up biting them on the arse. So they need to push the envelope as far as they can without crossing a red line, I guess, for the Americans. Now, a massive explosion seemed to have taken place in Odessa. Huge plumes of acrid smoke there. It looks rising into the sky. Something significant was struck. It could have been that it was this. So in Odessa, over 40 trucks were ruined during the morning attack by Russia. Some kind of depot there was struck by the Russians. And you can see a lot of burned logistics vehicles taken out. So maybe that was what was struck. And that's going to affect exports and the economy and probably grain and whatever else is exported through Odessa. So that's again, the idea was that the Russians, 2 nights ago, were not striking military targets. I think they probably struck a few military targets, or at least aiming for them last night. But the night before, it was explicitly critical infrastructure and civilian infrastructure. Right. Then we have Zelensky saying, today I started with a separate long conversation with Chief Commander Syrskyi. So this is in answer to the strikes from 2 nights ago, and one supposes last night as well. We discussed in detail the repulsion of the missile strike, our response to Russia. We are preparing it, the use of F-16s, and the operation in the Kursk region. We continue our actions in the designated areas exactly as Ukraine needs. Now, some people are saying that the use of F-16s is their reaction to, their response to Russia. I would read this as being generic. The repulsion of this missile strike, our response to Russia, we are preparing it. The use of F-16s in the operation in the Kursk region. I don't know about the use of English here, or in his case, Ukrainian. I don't know if that is the response to that missile attack is something that's going to involve F-16s, or this is generally what we're doing in responding to Russia. We are now introducing F-16s. We are attacking into Kursk. Of course, the attack into Kursk wasn't a response to the missile attack. So, yeah, we continue our actions in designated areas exactly as Ukraine needs. This day, we have more control over the situation and another replenishment of the exchange fund. Prisoner exchange is there. The chief of staff also reported on the situation at the front in Donetsk region, both separately and at the Stavka on the Prokrovsk direction, the most difficult, the most Russian assaults, as well as in Vreminsk direction, Toretsk, Kurakivsk. So I presume this is right, Kurakova, Vremivka, threats across all the areas that we've been talking about. There are decisions to strengthen our positions. I thank every soldier, commander, and unit who are doing their best to destroy as many enemy forces as possible. Today, the Chief of Staff also received all the necessary reports on the energy sector, the current state of the system, and the possibility of restoring it. The work will continue around the clock. We also reviewed in detail the situation with protective structures at power facilities, and there are several important decisions on this issue. I'm grateful to all those who are really fulfilling such tasks in a timely manner for the sake of our country and people. Okay, so that's Zelensky's response to ongoing strikes. Now, the Prolatarsk oil depot has now been burning for 9 days. Max 24 reported last night that the fire had spread to new tanks. However, there is imagery coming out this morning that it's under control. Congratulations to Russia's Department of Clouds and Emergency Services, says Tim White. On day 10 of the Prolatarsk, and bear in mind there's still a fire ongoing there, so they is still burning. On day 10 of the Prolatarsk oil depot fire, they finally seem to have it under control. It took injuries to 47 firefighters and allowing fires to spread across the town before the flames subsided. Again, still burning. Now, what is worth noting, this is Maccaberry here. Thank you for this comment. I have extensive experience, he said on my thread yesterday, with fires within flammable goods tank farms. I have heard many experts, so-called experts, commenting that many of the tanks at Prolatar storage are not damaged. So there's been people looking at satellite imagery, Mark Krutov or something like that, looking at that and saying, well, these ones are okay, those ones are damaged, these ones are kind of in the middle, purely based on satellite images. Having personally seen the damage that occurs in a tank farm when even just one tank catches fire, there is no way possible that any of the tanks in a Russian tank farm will be usable. All will have thermal metallurgical damage and will not meet even Russian codes for flammable storage. The satellite images do not tell us anything except that some tanks are completely gone. The images do not tell the story of the remaining intact tanks, but physics says they are 100% done. And actually, when you then look back at this tank farm, you're thinking, even those ones that are down there, the idea is that they will have had thermal damage that will render them, and the other infrastructure that's been damaged around here, probably pipes and all sorts, will render those tanks, thoroughly problematic. He goes on to say in a follow-up comment, speaking about the tank farms, I believe the same issue is true for the airfields. I'm most certainly not an aviation expert, but given the weight restrictions on aviation asset design, I would imagine the neighbouring airframes that satellite images seem to show are intact will probably be in similar collateral damage situation. There will be a lot more damage than satellite images show. Even small shrapnel fragments will most likely take out an airframe for an extended period. Thanks for that, Macca, and I would agree with you there. Yeah, the battle damage assessments of air bases are almost always conservative, very conservative. Okay, then there was the explosion at the Omsk refinery, the biggest oil refinery in Russia, and importantly one that's involved, I think, in export or transshipment or whatever it is to China. No one is crying about the news of the Omsk refinery, says Tim White. It's had to cut production almost in half after the explosion there yesterday morning. So, fire at Russia's Omsk refinery, says Reuters. Crude distillation unit CDU-11 was affected by the fire. Another primary unit, CDU-10, was already idle due to a fire in early August. CDU-10 and CDU-11 each have a production capacity of 8.6 million metric tons per year. This is massive. And when I keep talking about like the screw is turning for the Russian economy, for the Russian society and the Russian war machine by extension, it is concerning events like this. So I don't know. There was talk that the explosion was nothing to do with a strike, or it could have been a strike. Who knows? It could have been a careless smoking Russian or an issue due to poor maintenance or whatever. But at a massive installation like this, to have that effect on the output is insanely important. So that could affect money going to Russia from China, and it could affect the way that the Russian economy itself works, with people having an economic entities, having a lack of access to fuel and energy. Yes, so I think that is super important. It's worth looking at. Joe Blogs did a video a couple of weeks ago talking about the reserves, Russian reserves being affected. It's not just that they're dipping into their reserves to pay for stuff like the war and fixing stuff like this, but it's also that the ruble has meant that the exchange rate means that their reserves are worth, basically from the start of the war to now, I think they've dipped into 43% of their reserves, but actually it works out at 53% because of the exchange rate. So over half of their reserves have gone. And it's issues like this that are showing that they are unable to produce as much hydrocarbon output as they would like, and are not able to sell it as much as they like due to OPEC. They've had to make a they've voluntarily agreed to cut production and are not getting the amount of money they would like for their oil. The flip side is that they are still getting sort of $70 a barrel. There's a really interesting matrix that I think was it Bloomberg did that looks at the price of oil and the amount of output, and the amount of output on the y-axis and the price of oil on the x-axis. And depending on where Russia are, that's how long they can sustain this war. So if they're getting like $100 a barrel and they're producing it at these huge rates, then they can sustain this war until 2090, right? They can just easily able to do that. But the reality is they're not producing that much, and they're not getting that much. Where they are having more success than we'd like is in the price that they can sell the oil for. So at $70 a barrel, they need to be basically $55 a barrel. If these sanctions could be enacted in such a way that they will work as they were originally, where they were being forced to sell for $55 or so, or even $45 at some points per barrel, then they would run out of money next year. So Russia would run out of money next year. That's how important price caps are if they worked, right? The air defense systems Ukraine is using to intercept over 200 missiles. Here's a list of the myriad systems that Ukraine is using, from old Soviet era to old NATO era to new NATO era to newer Russian equipment. Your books, your S-300s. Then you've got European SAMP-T, Patriot, Iris-T, SLM and SLS, NASAMs, MiG-29, Su-27s, F-16s, RIM-7 modified books. They're the Frankensams, the books, the Hawks, the older system there, small arms, Gepard, Skynex, Vampire APKWS launchers on both trucks and helicopters. I would have thought S-125 Strela, OSA, Avenger, Kratal, Aspeed launchers, Stinger, Stormer, other man-pads, several different anti-air gun systems. It's just wow, they're managing with all of those systems. Incredible. Anyway, moving on to other bits and pieces. There is an ongoing rumbling issue between the Rusich battalion and Kadyrov. So the Kadyrovites, the Chechen predominantly Islamic fighters from Chechnya who are fighting for the Russians. There have been videos of issues at checkpoints with and fights almost between conventional Russian forces and the Chechens. Well, now the Rusich battalion has had an issue. They've stabbed the Kadyrov man to death and buried him. There's also an explicit video that he's going to leave out. But yeah, basically there's an issue between those components of the Russian war machine. Good news for the Ukrainians, I guess. Rebar weighs in onto the pro-Russian mill blogging source, weighs in on the rumours of a Ukrainian operation in the Kherson region, primarily focusing on the possibility of a large-scale landing operation. They take into account problems that the current Russian group in the area has, but do not suspect this. They do suspect this, maybe another part of the Ukrainian intelligence operation. In other words, Rebar saying, yeah, okay, there are weaknesses in a number of places, and there are these rumours that the Ukrainians are getting ready for a attack in, say, Kimber Spit or across the Dnipro or in Zaporizhia. But actually, the reality is that that's probably psyops from the Ukrainians. I would generally agree with that. although, there's been some, Forbes, for example, reporting these claims that the Ukrainian army is standing up new mechanized brigades. A sign that Ukraine's leaders don't expect Russia's wider war on Ukraine to end anytime soon. So they're still putting together new units. In fact, there was also, I think, 2 brigades being put together in Europe from expat, if you like, or refugee or migrant Ukrainian workers or citizens in Europe. So Poland and Czechia are doing this, I think. I think those are the 2 nations. So apparently 2 brigades have been formed of them, so that's really good. Ukrainian officials are preparing to present a list of long-range targets. So I said I'd come back to this in Russia to top US national security officials that they think Kiev's military can hit if Washington were to lift restrictions on US weapons. This is such an ongoing issue, but it's so important. It's so frustrating as well that Ukraine are unable to use Western weapons to hit those important targets deep in Russia. Right, in Kursk, the Russian patriots have some fun. This is how the people of Kursk thank their defenders. So this is a really important difference between Ukraine and Russia. This is how the people of Kursk thank their defenders. Taxi from Kurchatov, so where the nuclear power plant is in Kursk, to Kursk is 7,000 rubles. Washing is 3,000 rubles per person. In Ukraine in February 2022, doctors, taxi drivers, etc. would refuse to charge when a full-scale invasion started. I personally experienced that, says PS01. In other words, when your back's against the wall, the Ukrainians pull together and work as a community. This is really important. There have been lots of anecdotes about this. We've seen Russian troops loot Russian shops and businesses, such as the Wild Berries warehouses in the Kursk area. We've seen Russian citizens loot as well. As soon as the Kursk invasion of the Ukrainians into Russia started, instead of the Russians coming together and uniting, they split into chaotic, disparate, everyone for themselves kind of situations where they started looting and charging over the odds for washing or for taxis, whereas in February 2022, Ukrainians didn't charge out of solidarity with each other. It's just a huge cultural difference there that has been evidenced a number of different times. And another example of weirdness in Kursk is traffic cameras are still operating in Kursk, says Rob Lee, and people are receiving speeding fines when trying to outrun first-person view drones. Some have resorted to covering their license plates, but the traffic police force them to remove them. So still trying to operate traffic police while people are trying to escape drones smashing into their vehicles. Just, quite incredible. Anyway, there you go. That's today's first video for the day. Well, second, really. Lots of content. I know the videos are long at the moment. There's just so much going on in all over Ukraine with these massive attacks into Ukraine, with what's going on in Kursk, with what's going on in Donetsk, all the losses and hits. So apologies that they are longer than they really should be. Take care and speak to you soon. And I'll continue to stutter and stammer. I do apologize. Goodbye.